This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so yesterday we were looking at how to create a simple virtual machine. We went ahead, we said, okay, fine, what are the components that are required? And just to recap, we had a virtual network, or we have a virtual network rather, which is something like 10.0.0.0 / 16 is the virtual network that we have. And as I said, virtual network is just going to give you a network isolation. It's going to isolate your resources from the rest of the public cloud or from the rest of the internet, and inside which I'm now telling you have a subnet. So one simple subnet, which is something like 10.0.0.0 / 24. This is what I took. And if I say 24, I get 256 IPs and 251 usable IPs. Meaning out of the 256 minus 5, which is 251 IPs, this is attached to the virtual network. And when I create a virtual machine, I am telling a very important component of the machine called NIC card. Network interface card gets created. This is for communication, meaning this is the card or this is the piece of software that the virtual machine uses in order to talk to and talk from or receive communications from, let's say, the other resources that are present inside your network. And then finally, we have a virtual machine that is getting attached to the network interface card. Network interface card is getting attached to this particular subnet, and virtual machine is getting attached to the network interface card out here. And let's scroll down. Sorry. And you have a disk, not one but two different disks out here that are attached, one being your data disk. Okay, let me delete this out. One being your data disk and the other being your C drive, which is the OS disk out here. So we have a data disk, we have a OS disk out here that is getting attached to your virtual machine out here as such. So if you look at your architecture, if I firstly go into the virtual network, I have the subnets, and inside the subnet there is one IP which is missing. Out of 251, there is one IP that is missing out here. And if I go into something called as connected devices, and if I just refresh the screen, okay, fine. There is one device that is connected, which is called what? Network interface. This is the network interface card, NIC card. And the network interface card has an IP address of what? 10.0.0.4. If I add one more network interface card here, it will take an IP called 10.0.0.5 till all the way 10.0.0.255 till this particular subnet range. This is the entire range of this particular subnet out here as such. If I click on this particular network interface card, it will load the resource telling this is network interface, and it tells you what is the private IP of this particular network interface and what is the resource that is attached to this particular network interface out here. And this is your virtual machine. A virtual machine out here as such. And if I click on this particular virtual machine, it will now it will now take me to this particular virtual machine out here. And I stopped the virtual machine yesterday, so I'll real quick start this out. It'll also explain what to stop, start, and all that stuff. And once I go into this particular virtual machine, it tells me a couple of things. Firstly, what is the size of the machine? It is DS2V3, 2 virtual core CPU, 8 GB RAM, the virtual network, and the subnet what it is attached to. And if I scroll down, the private IP address of this particular virtual machine out here. Very importantly, each and every resource inside the network to communicate with it. Sorry. I'm sorry, can you come again, please? 12th? No, this is not the batch. No, sorry, sorry for the disturbance. Yes. So, as I was telling, each and every resource inside your network needs to have an address. Needs to have an address out here. Just like, see, each and every individual that is sitting in this class has an address of his own. So, if I ask where you live, you tell this is where I live. So, if I want to send you a letter, if I want to communicate with you, I'll send that particular letter to your address, right? In the same way, each and every resource has something called as an address, which is identified by its IP address out here. And this virtual machine has, very importantly, this is the terminology that I'm using, called as a private IP address out here as such. Now, okay, fine. Let me take a very quick pause. This is what I wanted to just give a recap of it. So, anyone, any questions here that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take before we move forward? Again, region is something that you cannot change. You cannot update the region of a resource as it's created, but you can certainly update the size of a machine after it is created. Let's say you created a machine with something like two virtual core CPUs and 8 GB RAM. You want to increase the size. We call it as a scale up operation. You want to increase the size of the machine. If you want to increase the size, you can just scroll down into the options, go into the size, and let's say that I want a size of 4 GB and 16 combination out here, and I can say resize. What this is now going to do is that this is now going to resize my machine, take me to a higher capacity, same D series, take me to a higher capacity of 4 virtual core CPUs and 16 GB RAM out here as such. This is what it's sorry, this is what it's going to give me right now. So let me give it a second. So this operation will take about a minute or so, and after 1 or 2 minutes, it's going to now tell me that okay, fine, you know what, the resizing of your sorry, the resizing of your machine is done, and the machine is now allocated with a higher capacity. Now it's telling this is higher capacity out here. So if I go back into the overview page, and if
So
I
during this
just
process, the virtual machine is running, right? I mean, there if there is any
the virtual
activity.
machine, yes, it's in an active state. Yes, the virtual machine is running. It's not going to impact the processes that are running on the virtual machine out here.
What is this? The virtual machine agent status is not ready.
We'll talk about that. We'll see
Okay.
what is the agent status. Let's forget
One,
about that for now.
okay.
Yes.
One other question, Kiran.
Hmm.
So
Okay,
the
please.
images of one virtual machine
Okay.
can be replicated across the regions because the regions are isolated
Hmm.
data centers, right? Can
Hmm.
we copy and paste or move images from one to other?
Move images from one to other. So very firstly, uh, to elaborate that, when you're telling image, just talking about the
Let's
operating
say,
system, aren't you?
yeah, let's say this virtual machine, right? So
Correct.
once we have configured this virtual machine,
Hmm.
we can take a snapshot or image of it, and can we move that
Correct.
to other region?
No, you cannot move that to another region. It is within the same region out here. Images are also impacted by the regional availability. It's the same region that you can, let's say, produce an image out here as such.
So for a DR situation, we cannot do that.
See, for a DR, that's a different point. That's a different question. When you talk about a DR, you get concepts like something called site recovery. There's something
Hmm.
called DR and site recovery and so on and so forth. So you implement those concepts out there. We'll go into that.
Okay.
But for Image replication, no, you cannot replicate your image into a different, let's say, data center out here as such.
So even that is a custom image.
Even if it's a custom image, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, any more questions, guys? So if you see, I have resized my machine right now. It's now running on a higher capacity, which is 4 virtual cores and about 16 GB of memory out here that is allocated to it right now. Yes, anyone, any questions? Sorry? We can't do resize manually. We did resize manually only. Now we did resize manually only. That's what we did right now. So we resized it manually only. That is automatically. That's you're talking about automatic way not to reach a resize. You can do it provided you have a PowerShell script or provided you have some kind of an automation in place. You can do it. But I'm just saying, telling you that okay, fine, manual is an option. If you want, you can increase or decrease your size. Now, one quick thing that I want to really get into is that yes, I created a machine. Now, what I want to do is that I just don't want to come to this portal and look at this machine. I created a machine for a purpose. The purpose here is to host my applications, host some kind of an application out here. Now, what I want to do as a user is I am a user and I want to connect to this particular machine. I want to go inside this machine. I want to, let's say, do much more capabilities. Like I want to, let's say, change some features of the operating system of the machine, or I want to install some softwares inside this machine, or I want to take my application and run on top of this particular machine. That's what I really want to do out here. Now, in order to connect to a Windows machine, I'm talking about specifically a Windows machine out here, there is a concept called remote desktop connection. There's a concept called remote desktop connections out here, which means I, as a user, I want to connect to this particular machine. And if I want to connect to this particular machine, very importantly, I have to know the address of this machine. Do I know the address of this machine? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, yes. IP
Yes,
address of
I know the address, which is 10.0.0.4.
4.
This is the address of the machine. So what I do is that I'll say, okay, fine, you know what, I want to connect to this particular machine. I will come back to my Azure portal. And here I have something called what? Private IP address. I'll copy this address. I'll go into my search window and I'll say remote desktop connection. So as in when I say remote desktop, I have something called remote desktop connection as an application that is preloaded with my Windows operating system. I do not have to install this and so on and so forth. And I'll say open. And it's now telling me what is the address of the computer that you want to connect to. I copied my address. I'll paste it here. 10.0.0.4 and I'll hit the connect button out here as such. So what it's trying to do is that now I am trying to establish a connection with this particular virtual machine out here as such that is running as a part of the Azure cloud. Now, my laptop doesn't know which cloud is it running a part of. All it knows is that okay, fine, there is a machine that you want to connect to. It's a remote machine, meaning there is a machine. It's running somewhere. You want to connect to it, and if the machine allows you to connect, I will go ahead and let's say establish a connection. But what is it telling me right now? Is not enabled server. The remote computer is turned off. The remote computer is not available on the network out here as such. No matter how many times you try this out, no matter how many times, how many ever times you try this out, you're still going to get the same error. You're still going to go ahead and let's say get the same error out here. Why do you think we are getting this error out here as such?
The port 3389 is not open.
The port 3389 is not enabled. Okay, I'll take that input. Let's see. Port. What do we mean by this? Called a terminology called as a port.
And inbound
Firewalls
IP
also
address is
need
also
to.
not IP and
Yes.
port.
Firewall rules.
Firewall rules. Okay, port and also something called as firewall rules. Okay, let me talk about that firewall rules.
In VPN, we need to some open ports from source to destination.
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
Yeah, we need to open ports from
Yes,
from source to destination
source to destination.
in
So
virtual.
what?
Yeah,
Okay. Hmm.
in VPN. In
Yes.
VPN, we need to open ports.
In this one, we have to open the ports in the machine that we have to open the port. Okay, but
Network
what
security group
exactly?
and to follow.
Network security group ports? Yes. Firewall rules.
RDP service
I'm
need to be enabled.
RDP services. Yes, RDP services. Let me
So
put it in
this
a
is a
very
public
generic way. Yes, let me put it in
source
a
IP
very,
is
very.
a public IP, right?
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please?
So it is coming from a source is coming from a public IP. You need to allow that as well.
The source is
Obvious.
coming from a public IP. Fine. I'll take all those inputs. But this is what I want to get into. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. Then we're talking about ports. Then someone said there is something called firewall. Then someone said there is something called source and destination. Very simple. Let me put it in a very simple way for people who are not especially from, let's say, the IT background, not to understand this. See, very simple. What's happening out here is this: my machine that I'm using, which is my laptop, is trying to communicate with a remote machine. Just like I'm giving a call to one of y'all. I'm trying to establish a communication between my phone and your phone. My phone has a number, your phone has a phone number. That's how our addresses get identified. Now, let's say that the number that is assigned to my laptop, if I want to understand that, I'll say, what's my IP? This is the IP address, or rather, I'll tell this is the public IP address that is assigned to my machine. Okay, just give me a second. Guys, can you please go on mute? Anil, can you please go on mute if you're not talking, please? Okay, this is the public IP address that is assigned to my laptop. So this is where I am. I have a public IP address that is assigned to my machine, which is called 115.97.187.137. Just like a phone number that is there with my cell phone, right? I am trying to, let's say, make a call or establish a connection with a remote machine. Meaning, I'm trying to give you a call, one of you a call, and your number is 10.0.0.4. But what is happening is that in your phone, you have added my number in a block list. You told please block any number. I mean, whichever number I don't know, you put a rule in your phone telling us whichever number I don't know, please block it out. Please don't get this call. That is where rules come into picture. Wherein telling who should you allow, who should you not allow. That's where
Inbound.
source and destination comes into picture. Meaning, do I want to allow an incoming call? Same thing, do I want to allow an incoming request? These are called inbound rules. If you want to make a call to me, you have to set something called as an outbound rule. The inbound and the outbound rules together are configured into a resource called as NSG, Network Security Group Rule. And if you have observed or not, if you go back into the resource group that we were looking at, even without you knowing, you have something called what? Network Security Group Rule that was created as a part of your, let's say, creation of the virtual machine out here. And if I go here into the NSE, it's having what? Inbound and outbound security rules. And if you go into the network interfaces, it is attached to what? The network interface card, which is attached to your virtual machine, which means network security group rule as a resource is attached to your network interface card, and it is enforcing rules on your network interface card on whom it should communicate with, whom it should not communicate with out here as such. Now, in order to allow these communications called remote desktop communications, because this is what I'm doing, right? I'm using an application called remote desktop communication or remote desktop connection. And in order for your virtual machine to allow this one, your NIC card should allow remote desktop communications. In order for the NIC card to allow, your NSG rule should have an explicit rule out here, or should have a rule telling that please allow remote desktop connections. And in order to do that, please open up something called as a remote desktop protocol port. We call this as an RDP port. So port is nothing but a channel for communication. And in order to allow my remote desktop connection, I need to work on, or I need to, let's say, open up a port number, or I need to open up a port with the name called RDP. And each and every port, right, has a number. Like if you want to open the RDP port, you have to, let's say, open up a number called 3389. Standard communication, or this is, let's say, the standard protocol that is used across the industry. RDP works on something called as 3389. If this particular, let's say, virtual machine needs to communicate with the internet, we have to open up other set of ports called HTTP or HTTPS. HTTP works on a number called 80. HTTPS works on a number called 443. So each and everything has its own rules. And in order to open this up, I have to target something called as what? The network security group rule. So I'll come down and I'll say this is an inbound security rule because it's an incoming call. I'll go here, and there are something called default rules that are there in place. We'll talk about that in depth in what is an NSG, what are the default rules, and etc. And I'll add a rule here. I'll say add a rule. It's now telling what is the source, meaning is the source an IP address? Is it my IP address? Is it something called service tag application security group? I'll say, you know what? The source can be anything. The source can be anything, not a problem. The source port range, it's telling star, meaning from any port on your local machine you try to communicate, I'll accept it out. Then it's telling what is the destination. In my case, the destination can be an IP address, let's say a virtual network and all that stuff. I'll say any. I'll say service here is an RDP service. As and when I did it, do you see what is happening? It's telling, okay, fine, you know what? If you want an RDP service, the port number is what? 3389. That's the standard port number. And if I scroll down, it's telling action is what? Allow. Then I have something called what? A priority. We'll talk about what a priority really is. I'll put 100 right now. I'll say RDP underscore allow. I'm just giving a name here and I'll say add. So what I'm doing is that now I am opening up. There are a couple of rules that are already there. I'm not changing anything here. I cannot change anything here. But I now created a new rule called what? RDP allow to allow the port number called 3389 on that particular virtual machine so that I as a user from the internet, from my own IP address can connect to this particular virtual machine. This has to be there. If you want to allow the RDP, this has to be there out here as such. So let me do one thing. Now I put an RDP rule. RDP is now allowed, which means that the communication between my laptop that is sitting at 115 something to that machine which is sitting at 10.0.0.4, this communication is allowed. This communication is allowed out here. Let me try
Yes.
that. Let me go there and let me come here and let me again try to connect. I'll say connect and let me see sorry, and let me see if this allows me right now. So let's give it a second to load it out, and it's taking more time than we expected. Same error. Then what's the issue? I have my firewall, so people told that there's a destination, there's a source. I allowed that using something called as network security group rules. I went ahead into the network security group rules, allowed that out. Everything is there. Then what's the issue right now?
So the user should be part of the local admin group of the server.
Mm,
RDP.
not really,
Not. I mean,
because
this is a connection basically, right? Okay.
that's fine. This is just a connection, right? So while I try to establish the connection, it will ask me for the user ID and password. I will give the user ID and the password that I created, or I have given while I've created the machine. So when we created the machine yesterday, we gave a user ID called test user and the password. So even if the user is not a part of that particular machine, I can still go ahead and establish a connection provided I have the password. But the issue is not with the connection, or the issue is not with the credentials.
Yeah, got it. Yeah,
The issue is with the connection only. Like I'm not even
correct.
able to establish a session with that particular machine at all.
Yeah, at
What
the
about
subnet level, I think you need to allow it, right? There something called network access control list
Mhm.
for routing to be enabled.
Okay, routing to be enabled. Okay.
what
Any more
about the
inputs?
outbound rules? Like inbound is okay, but it has to give the response back, right? Outbound.
Outbound by default is allowed, all right? I think. Is that
But
correct?
let's see that. If you look at the outbound rule, see, I don't really have an outbound rule out here. So it's telling I mean, again, I same have the custom rules. I mean, I have the default rules out here. I don't have a custom rule. But again, see, if we logically look at this,
First rule is allowed.
yes, the if I logically look at this, what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to do an inbound connection. For the machine, this is an inbound call. It's not really an outbound call. So even though the outbound connection is, or even though the outbound rule is not established in place, it would have still worked. It should have still worked. Even if you want me to give that, I can also go there. I can say outbound rule. I can say add a rule. Same thing. I can say RDP.
No, you have
I can just go ahead
everything.
and say
Any is allowed, right? Any port,
any
any
port is allowed.
protocol.
Yes, any port is allowed.
So
Any
it
port
is
is allowed.
open.
That's not a problem. It's open. The machine is right now open. I'm opening this machine up to the internet. It's open, but
What
there is still
what is
this
the
issue.
exclamation? Actually, is it a warning? Exclamation on the RTP
Okay, the
allow.
yellow color information, yes. That's a
Uh,
warning telling that, okay, fine, you are exposing your
you are
machine to
open.
the
Yeah,
internet.
okay. Yeah.
Yes,
So I
this is
think
what
the
it's telling. It's
routing need to be enabled, right? I mean, from the internet to.
routing need to be enabled. Okay, routes need to be enabled. Anything else?
Sir, how about that VPN connection? Like in which location you want?
Location not really, because even if the machine is running as a part of any location, I should have still been able to establish the communication. That's the concept of the cloud, right? Meaning the machine can be running as a part of any location, but I should still be able to establish a communication with it. Yes,
So
sorry, you had some.
where is the IP defined here? I mean, we didn't turn IP.
Just a second. Just
Yeah, it
coming
is a
back to
10
this.
segment now.
Sorry, just a second.
It
Just a
is a
second.
10
Just hold on.
segment now.
Okay. Just hold on. Just a second. I'll just take a question from the offline class, and I'll just come. Sorry, just take input from the offline class and come back. Yes, go ahead, please. Internet connection is not there. Sorry. But how am I controlling the internet connection for that machine? Hmm. 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 That's fine, but the internet which is running or not is something that I'm not controlling, right? Because I'm not going into the physical layer of this machine. I'm just working on a simple software that is running on top of the server. So that internet and all, that's something that I do not really control on. But yes, one thing that we
I
have to observe.
I got where the problem is.
Mhm. Yes, go ahead,
So
please.
it doesn't have a public IP, right? It is a
It
private
doesn't have
IP.
a public IP. Exactly, it doesn't have a public IP.
And you are trying
It
to connect
only
to
has
the
a
private.
to a private IP address. See, the rule of a virtual network is very clear. What is it telling you is that 10.0.0.4, this address. Let me remove this out and let me put it here. Now, there's a rule here, okay? Is that this address, which is called 10.0.0.4, is an internal address or it's a private address, like it's a private number. This number can only be accessed within the walls of this network. When I say within the walls of this network, let's say if I have another machine with an address called 10.0.0.5, this machine can freely talk to this particular machine. They can talk to each other. If this user is a part, is an internal part of the network, meaning you're a user, you're in the office, you're working from the office. If you're inside this network, you can go ahead and talk to this machine directly over a private IP. You do not need a public IP address. But if you are coming from the internet, this address is very different than this address. And when I'm trying to establish a communication, no matter if I even have a network security group rule, very importantly, we have to understand network security group rules apply to a public IP address. Whereas the default rules come into picture out here right now, wherein they are telling that, okay, fine, you know what? If this IP or this IP rather that you're trying to, let's say, use is different from this IP, is it different? Yes, it's a public IP, this is a private IP. Communication by default is kicked back. That's the reason I am getting that particular error telling that, okay, fine, that red screen telling that, okay, fine, you're not able to establish a communication for it. If I want to establish a communication through this particular virtual machine in this scenario, I will need something called as a public IP address, which means an address of this particular virtual machine outside the network. Because I'm a user who's outside the network. If I want to access, sorry, if I want to access this, I want an address called as a public IP address out here. This is situated, which is situated outside the network, but still attached to the NIC card of this particular network out here. Because NIC card is what is responsible for communication. Both the private and the public IP will be or should be attached to your NIC card out here as such. For which, if I go back into my Azure portal, I will have to now look for something called as a public IP address. I will say public IP address. As of now, I do not have one. So I'll create one. So I'll create a public IP. It's telling what kind of an IP address that you want out here. I'll say it's an IPv4 address. There is something called SKU, standard and basic. I will talk about this while we are doing a concept called load balancing. It will help us better understand there. I'll just give a name of the public IP address. I'll say test IP VM. I'm just giving a name to the resource. Just like I said demo VM, I'm giving a name to this IP address. I am not defining a number. There is no number that I'm defining. I cannot define a number. I can only tell what is the name. And please hold on to this start. Just called IP address, static or dynamic. As of now, you only have one option called what? Static. I'll say, okay, this is good enough.
This is because you are creating and assigning public IP now. That's the reason it is static. Or when you are creating a VM, so you have an option for dynamic.
No, it is because the SKU of the IP address is standard. Standard IPs only come in static.
Static. Okay. If it is basic, then it is dynamic also.
If it's a basic, then I have an option to say whether it's a dynamic IP or a static IP address.
Okay.
So I'll just put this as static and standard right now, and it's now asking me what is the subscription, what is the resource group, what is the region. Very importantly, the IP and the virtual machine should be in the same region. So I'll again put this here. I'll say it is East to S2. That's what I had. And I'll say create. What I'm now doing is that I'm ending up creating something called as a public IP address. Am I giving the address? No, I'm not giving the actual IP address. I'm just giving the name of that particular resource. It's Microsoft which will give me the actual IP address out here. They'll tell you, okay, fine, you know what, you asked for an IP. Let me go in the background, see what are the available IPs that I do have. What is this available set of IPs that I do have? And it's saying, okay, fine, the resource is created. I'll go to the resource right now. And you see now I have a public IP address, which is 2069.195.107 out here as such. So okay, fine, this is your public IP address right now. And what I'll do right now is that I will associate this particular public IP address with what? With what should I associate this with?
To the NIC.
To the NIC card, NIC card, because that's what is the center of communication. So I'll say, okay, fine, you know what? Let me go ahead, hit the associate button, and it's telling which resource that you want to associate this with. Is it a load balancer? I'll say no, it's a network interface. And here it's telling it can be associated with a network interface called what? Demo VM something. This is the network interface that is attached to our virtual machine. I'll say okay. Now, now there is an association that is done. There's an association that is happening between my public IP address and the network interface card, which is attached to my virtual machine. So the public IP address is technically attached here. And I, as a user, can talk to the public IP address. And if I talk to the public IP address, this is how the communication is now routed. I am a user, is talking to the public IP address, public IP is talking to the NIC card is talking to the VM. That's how the model of communication is being established. If I now go here, it should take like a minute. It is trying to update the network interface card in the background. So either you can go to the network interface card and update your IP address, or you can come to the IP address and say associate or disassociate or dissociate. I mean, here I do not have an option called dissociate because it's not associated with anything out here as such. And now, do you see what is this? Can we take the question in 1 minute, please? Yes.
No, because we are in the screen, right? So I just wanted to.
Okay. Yes, please go ahead. If the question is here in this screen,
I just want to clarify on the location East US2, and it mentions zone 132. So what is it? I mean, this is a Okay, it has three
Yes,
availability zones.
it's a ZRS.
Okay.
Zone redundancy, which means that even if one data center in East US is down, your public IP will not be impacted. Meaning public IP again is nothing but a resource that is created in a data center, right? So if the data center is down, it's telling, okay, fine, you know what, you still have zone 2 and zone 3. It's a zone redundancy that is established
Okay.
for, let's say, the better availability. And this is an option that you get with a standard IP, not with a basic.
Okay.
And now if you look at this, it's telling associated to what? This particular NIC card. Let me directly go jump into my virtual machine. Let me directly jump into my virtual machine right now. And do you now see something called as a public IP address for my virtual machine? Saying I have a public IP address. I also have what? A private IP address. Private IP address is coming from the subnet. Public IP is coming from the public IP address that you have created. And if I just scroll down, there is networking, and under networking you have a public IP. I can just copy this out. Now I can go to my RDP. Instead of giving, let's say, the private IP, I can give my public IP here. Okay, I don't think it got copied properly. And I'll say show options. And I'll give the username here, telling it is test user, the one that I created earlier. Now it's asking me for the password. I'll go and give the password out here. And now I establish a connection with what? The demo virtual machine. I'll say yes. And now I'm getting inside the RDP connection session or the RDP session with that particular virtual machine with that particular username called test user. And now I am inside the machine right now as such. I'm now inside this particular machine. And now I'm able to see the user interface of this particular machine, which goes by the name called 2069.195.107 out here as such. So the idea of this lecture was to just give you an idea or just to give you an overview of what are all the services that can be attached to your virtual machine. What is the significance of it? Of course, we need to do a deep dive in something called network security group rule and the public IP addresses. That's something that I will introduce in a later class. But yes, any questions that I can take till here? Anything that I can take till here?
Couple of questions.
Here one question.
Okay, one at a time, please. Okay.
Hello.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead,
have
please.
one. You are given one public IP, and it is assigned to one server. If you want more server means how can I assign every server having their own private IP?
Just a second. I'll just switch my speakers. I'll just switch my speakers out here. Just a second. Can you please go ahead now?
Yeah, you are assigning one public IP to the one server.
Okay.
To Nickard.
Okay.
Yeah. If you having more server means you want to changing every server having their own public IP.
Okay. The question here is that you have one server, you associated one public IP with the server. If you have more servers, does each and every server need its own public IP? Answer is yes, it does. If you, let's say, go ahead and want to have individual servers out here, then yes, of course, you will need individual IPs, individual public IPs to those servers. Is there a way to avoid it? Yes, there is a way to avoid it. We can also look at that.
One more question. More, if you having more public IP means who is providing that public IP?
Who is providing the public IP right now? Right now, when I created the public IP, who gave me the public IP?
Microsoft.
Exactly. If you have more public IPs also, Microsoft is itself giving me those public IPs out here. I do not have a control on what is the public IP that I can get. I will just get a number. That's it. What is the public IP that I'll get is now controlled by Microsoft out here as such.
So few questions, Kiran.
Go ahead, please.
First one is this public IP address are chargeable when it is
Correct.
not associated.
Correct.
I mean, when they are not associated, just create and just leave it. Once you
It
create
is
and leave it,
still chargeable.
still
Yes,
chargeable
it is still
because
chargeable.
those are not
Yes,
in use.
those are not in use. Though those are not in use, again, the point here is that yes, a good question. The question here was that are the public IPs chargeable even if they're not associated with the NIC card? Answer is yes, if it is static.
Okay. If it is
No
not, yeah,
dynamic,
if it is dynamic.
yes.
Okay. And
If it is static, yes. Go ahead, please.
right. So we have given a name for IP address, right? Why do we
Mhm.
need to give a name? I mean, we
It's
can
a
directly assign IP.
name. Yes, you can directly assign the IP. That's right. But you cannot, at a user end, you cannot go ahead and tell this is the number that I want. This is something that you cannot do.
Hmm.
So for you as a user to create something, you'll need to name a resource in Azure. And that is exactly the name of the IP address that you have given out here as such.
Yeah,
So all
without a
I'm doing is
name. So because
Mhm.
Microsoft will assign the dynamic IP address or a static one,
Correct,
right? So
correct,
that IP you can associate with the NIC card of the virtual machine,
right,
right? Directly.
right.
So what is the importance of naming that IP address?
The importance of naming the IP address is that
Is it
when
being
you are
used somewhere?
attaching, yes, it is being used somewhere. The reason it is important out here is this: when your NIC card, especially when you're automating resources, when you're creating resources out here, when your NIC card is getting attached to a public IP address, it needs to understand what is the resource ID of this particular IP, and the name of the IP address defines the resource ID out here. Because when we are attaching a NIC card, I mean, when let's say, especially when you're coming through automation and you're creating multiple resources at a go, you don't really have your public IP address right now. How do you refer to it? Is by the name,
No,
and
you can
all the
also
resources
refer.
internally. You can
Sorry,
also refer,
you can
please.
also
Go ahead,
refer
please.
through the tags, right? There is a tag option.
Only if you have a name is where you get a tag. Yes, you have a tag option. That's right. But for you to even get into a tag, you need to have a name. You can tag your resource. I'm not telling that you cannot. But even before you put a tag, you need a name there. And if you look at the properties of any resource out here, the name of it takes a precedence. It's not the tag. This is all the resource ID of a particular resource. And if you look at
Okay.
the end, I am referring the name of a resource out here. It's not only me, my NIC card, my virtual machine will also refer back to this particular ID.
I just want to understand, I mean, where in the
Mhm,
automation the name is coming into importance, because in other clouds, right? So you don't
mhm,
have a name to
mhm.
the IP address. You directly use
Yes,
the IP address attached to the NIC card of
yes,
the virtual machine.
yes. So when you say that you do not have a name out here for, let's say, where an automation it really comes into picture,
Hmm.
we will have to look at automation for that. So we will have to really go ahead and do the automation for that. So while
Okay.
we do the automation, I will just refer back to this particular question,
Okay.
telling how this is being referred back out here as such.
All right. One basic question, last question. So
Good, please.
RDP, let's say the users are having Linux machines or Mac,
Okay.
machines, right?
hmm
So RDP doesn't by default comes into there, right? So
That's
how does
correct.
they connect to the Windows virtual machines?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really done an RDP from a Linux to a Windows, and like I did not really do a cross-platform, let's say, communication out here. Most of my work has been, on a single platform, either being a Linux or let's say the
Right,
Windows
right.
platform out here.
No. Generally,
But
why I'm asking is in an
Mhm.
organization, some of the organizations will give Mac machines to the
Correct.
employees.
hmm
So when they are deploying Azure and
Okay.
virtual machines running in
hmm
Azure cloud, so
Okay.
how does the Mac machines? It's a general thought because I'm using Mac. So
No, no,
how do I
definitely.
connect?
So again,
Yeah.
to be honest, I have not used a Max, but still, you have this particular option to go ahead and let's say use a Mac and then basically establish an RDP connection out here. Like there
Okay,
are
that.
they. I mean, you still can do command line and all these things out, but I'm not too sure about how do you establish the same thing out here. But I can do some research out here and I can get back to you on the same thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more
So in that
questions?
also will get public IP.
Mhm.
In free tier
Uh,
account also will get public IP. Is it
yes, of
chargeable or
course.
is it?
It is chargeable, but I mean, the question here is that in free trial, do we get public IP? Yes, you get public IP. Is it chargeable? Yes, it is chargeable. It will get deducted from the credits that you have, the credit points that you have. That's where it'll get deducted from.
So how many static public IPs are allowed? Is there a limit, higher limit for that?
Yes. How many static IPs are allowed? Is there a limit? Yes. The limit depends upon your subscription. So if I go into a subscription and if I click on my subscription per se,
It's a soft limit, right, Kiran?
it's a hard limit. It's not a soft limit, it's a hard limit. Again, you can request Microsoft to increase your limits. It just depends upon your case to case basis. So it's a hard limit, is what I can say. In 90% of the cases, even if you request for an increase in the quota limit, they'll still come back to you and say, you know what, we cannot really assign this at this particular point in time, and so on and so forth. But just to answer to your question, is there a limit? Yes, I'm going into my subscription, and here there is something called usage plus quota, wherein it's going to tell me what is the maximum usage that I can really do out here. So, and that too for a region. If I just scroll down, there should be something like public IP addresses. Let's see. Okay, IP. Let's see. Where's my IP address? Okay, this is virtual machine. This is total CPUs. I'll just scroll down to see if I have something like IP addresses out here. Okay, so let me do one thing. Let me pull all the resources out here that I have. Let's say IP. Okay, fine. So it's only talking right now about the compute resources that I do have. But let me go
Networking.
into the
Yeah.
networking resources. Yes. And here I have
Yeah.
the static
Static.
public IPs. This
10,
particular region, there are about
10, 10, right?
10 IP addresses that I can do. And if I exceed this limit, there is something called create create a support request for quota
Yes.
increase.
Yeah.
I can do that, but 90% of the 90% of the times Microsoft is just going to come back and say, you know what, I literally cannot give you this particular quota increases because this is something which is enforced at a subscription level. Again, this decided on a case to case basis, but according to what the experience that I do have, really doesn't, let's say, increase the amount of limit that you do have out here as such.
Yes.
Each and
I
every
mean, what?
resource. Yes.
Right.
God, please.
So can you also talk about sometime later,
Mhm.
not now? So what are the different levels of subscriptions available under support levels?
Uh, okay. Under the support, okay, different types of support available or different types of subscriptions available out here?
Is it only one subscription or is it premium subscription, something like that? Or in
Okay, I
AWS, we
can.
have several levels of
Mhm.
accounts, right? So the
Correct.
same way.
Sure, I can do that. We actually did cover that earlier, but yes, I can,
Okay.
do a refresh on the same thing out here as such.
And the support level as well. Okay. Or I can
Sure.
see the documentation. Okay, no problem.
Not a problem. I can do a support, let's say, somewhere on a weekend when we just connect. Please remind me. I can go ahead and do that after the automation session is done.
Okay.
Yes, any more questions, guys?
Kiran,
Hi
one
Kiran,
question.
I'm using a free trial one. Today it's expired, and but I'm able to log in with that one. But it's showing the credit card is zero, and I have already given the credit card, right? And is it automatically deduct or what will can you suggest for that one? What I have to do next?
Again, so just to follow your question back again, just I mean, my speakers are not that good today, so that's the reason I'm facing a little bit of issue.
Azure will not basically charge anything. And once the
If
200
it's a
credit is over,
free trial, yes. Once the 200 credits are over, or once that particular 14,000 rupees of credits are done, your subscription is automatically disabled. Subscription will go into an automatic disable phase out here. It's not going to really charge you. But if you are a little bit concerned about your credit card information, etc., you can go ahead do a cancel subscription after the subscription is done. And after you do a cancel, please give 3 to 4 days of time, and then come here and then do a delete of the subscription out here. So you can delete or you can cancel your subscription at a later point in time, but there isn't going to be any automatic charges.
so I cannot
Okay,
use
if
the
we
same
continue.
phone number, credit card for again second time registration.
No, that is, yeah, I mean, we cannot really use that. That's especially true after the lockdown phase has been done. Like, during the COVID, before the COVID period, we used to, even use debit card information in order to, let's say, go create Azure subscriptions. But now the policies have changed. They're not really allowing you to, let's say, use the same credit card or the same number again and again.
So either they look at the credit card number or the telephone number or
It's a
both.
combination of all these things. It's a combination of your credit card and your telephone number.
Kiran, one question.
Good, please.
Yeah, when you're connecting to remote desktop, you given that username and password, right? That
Correct.
password you already created, or that's a new password?
No, that password was already created when we were creating a virtual machine. So yesterday's session, when we were doing,
Yeah,
right, we gave the username and password while creation of the machine. So I'm using the same credentials again.
yeah, same credentials.
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
So
thank
this user will become automatically part of the remote desktop group, right?
Yes. It will become an administrator user. Now this is an
Local
administrator
admin.
account.
Yeah, local admin.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Local admin. That's true. All right. So I'm a little top of the hour right now. So if you have more questions, guys, please park it, and we'll take it in tomorrow's sessions, and we'll do a deep dive on, let's say, what do you do with this particular machine and what can we achieve with this and so on. Okay. Thank you and have a good day ahead.